Down in the pocket of Indiana is the city of Evansville, along the Ohio River known for Bosse Field and Mesker Zoo. Evansville is also known for having its deep German roots. This wasn't a problem until the U.S. declared war on Germany, and it caused a lot of hysteria and arguably the single greatest cultural change in all of Evansville's history. Suddenly, German Americans were suspected of disloyalty. This caused some uneasiness amongst the German residents. When the Great War broke out in 1914, there was a lot of debate about America's involvement. But once Woodrow Wilson took the declaration of war to Congress in 1917, the time for debating ended and it was time for the people of Evansville to show their patriotism. With German Americans' loyalty being questioned, it resulted in some people getting humiliated in public, some losing their jobs, and some even getting arrested. Even with Evansville's large German population, or maybe because of it, many residents felt compelled to spot disloyalty and enforce patriotism. On June 28, 1917, 3 years to the day after Austria's Archduke Franz Ferdinand's assassination sparked the war, 2 employees of the Bernstein overall factory were discharged. They supposedly expressed some disloyal sentiments towards America and President Woodrow Wilson. The 2 employees in question were Miss Alma Kisslinger and Mrs. Mamie Armstrong. It was alleged that Miss Kisslinger refused to donate to the Red Cross, and Mrs. Armstrong stated she would rather live under the rule of Kaiser than Woodrow Wilson. The proprietor of the factory, D.S. Bernstein, had asserted that Miss Kisslinger and Mrs. Armstrong had acknowledged making these statements. The other women of the factory held a meeting debating if the 2 should keep their jobs. When the employees of the Bernstein factory refused to work alongside the German sympathizers, the 2 women were fired. One of the first Americans to die in the war was Evansville's own James Bethel Gresham, who died on November 3, 1917. This event made people of German descent even more suspect. After Gresham's death, more incidents of accused disloyalty were reported in Evansville papers. One of these cases was on November 22, 1917, involving Joseph Rottmeyer. Rottmeyer was accused of allegedly showing affection towards Kaiser Wilhelm, the leader of Germany. He supposedly said, "Kaiser is a good man. If I met him on the street, I'd shake his hand." And another witness claims that he refused to buy a Liberty Loan bond, saying, "I will take my money out of the bank and bury it before I buy a bond." Liberty bonds were to be sold to finance the war. Refusing to buy them was a sign of disloyalty. On top of that, Rottmeyer was accused of making socialist claims, such as the U.S. favors the rich working class. And when local law enforcement came to investigate him, Rottmeyer agreed to sign a written apology, hang a flag in front of his house, and buy war bonds the next time there was a drive. There were some more violent incidents. One was a beating of 56-year-old John Schnake on December 19, 1917. He was beaten by his co-workers at the Smith Hohen Tool Works. Schnake missed work on December 28th because he had a tooth pulled. When he returned to work on Thursday morning, he found an American flag draped over his anvil. John was ordered to kneel in front of the American flag by his fellow workers. Schnake felt his co-workers merely wanted to humiliate him, and he refused to kneel. When he denied their charges of disloyalty and called them liars, he was assaulted. In the following day's newspaper, he denied making pro-German remarks. He did admit he hadn't purchased a war bond because he could not afford them. This made him rather unpopular in the factory. He acknowledged that he was of German descent when his coworkers asked him, but denied any sympathy for Germany or that Kaiser would whip the United States. The following day, Schnake left the factory. There are many other incidents of violence and intimidation. Frank Lamont, who was running as socialist candidate for mayor in Evansville in 1917, became the target of a mob in Elberfeld, Indiana. He escaped a band of 6 men who attempted to lynch him after giving a speech in which he claimed that the government had no right taking conscripted men to Europe. Lamont was also criticized in the press for defending slackers. In the end, Lamont was disbarred by his fellow Evansville attorneys, but still received over 2,500 votes in the mayor's race. In another case where violence was threatened, Reverend George Sievking of McCutcheonville was taken into custody to protect him from citizens of Evansville. He reportedly made some pro-German remarks rather openly. On April 18, 1918, he was sent to an internment camp for incarceration. During this time, Congress passed laws to criminalize people of German descent. The Espionage and Sedition Acts were passed in 1917 and 1918, prohibiting language or acts of disloyalty under penalties of 20 years in prison and a fine of $10,000. Another federal law that was passed required all men between the ages of 21 and 31 to be registered for selective service, and those who failed to do so were called slackers and were arrested. In January 1918, the federal government enacted legislation further restricting non-naturalized residents. The Department of Justice sent directions to Police Chief Schmidt to register all male German aliens over the age of 14. This law required the non-naturalized Germans to complete a 4-page form with 4 photographs, fingerprints, and provide detailed information. On top of that, no German male alien was allowed to move within the city without Schmidt's permission. The newspaper that served Evansville's German community also came under fire. A group known as the Patriotic 125 met at the Chamber of Commerce to discuss whether or not the printing of German-language newspapers should be allowed in Evansville. The group summoned Frederick Lowenstein, who was the Democrat's editor. Lowenstein defended the paper's patriotism, saying, "I defy any man to say the Democrats' editorials have not been loyal to the United States." Lowenstein pointed out that the government had admitted that there was a need for German newspapers in the country, and reminded those in attendance that his paper advocated for the purchase of Liberty bonds. The group of men that was assembled represented 6,000 to 7,000 families, and they decided that the time had come when no paper should be published in German, and the editor should discontinue the publication within a week. They insisted that Lowenstein stop the publication of the Evansville Democrat solely because it was written in German. Lowenstein did say that if the community believed that the publication of German hindered the United States in the prosecution of war, that he would stop the publication. Lawson was a little offended with the discontinuation of the paper, but he stayed loyal to the U.S. Schools and college curriculums were also impacted to the point where the German language was no longer taught. Legal historian Paul Finkelman says in 1915 about 25% of all high school students in America studied German, but by the end of World War I, it had changed dramatically. German had become so denounced that only 1% of high schools even taught it. Mayor Balsey was called on the halt of teaching German in Evansville schools. Many Evansville residents agreed that German was all propaganda to promote German ideas and the teaching of German efficiency. When school board member Reverend John Schneider cast a vote in opposition of the ban of teaching German, it was seen by many as an act of disloyalty. The committee of 125 that had taken a stand against the Evansville Democrat also went after Dr. Schneider. They met in the Chamber of Commerce and planned to demand his removal. When Dr. Schneider heard of the opposition, he resigned, saying he would now have more time to devote to patriotic causes. In the end, Evansville became less German as a result of the war. While there were some incidents that were reported and remembered, there were undoubtedly numerous incidents that were forgotten or handed down for one generation to another within families. Today, the restrictions of civil liberties during World War I are often forgotten, but for those who lived through that tumultuous time, never forgot it.
This has been an F.J. Reitz Feel the History production.